Welcome back to The Explainer, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Let's jump right in. Usually when we talk about power in America, right, our brains immediately go straight to Washington, D.C., to the politicians and those loud headlines that constantly dominate our news feeds. But today, we're going to look way beyond everyday politics. We're going to explore the core concept of who really holds power in America, uncovering the deeply rooted dynasties that have structurally shaped this nation from completely behind the scenes.
So who actually are America's most powerful families? It really is a fascinating question. I want you to think for a second about where true, lasting influence in this country actually originates. What if the people with the absolute greatest influence in America aren't always the ones standing behind a podium?
Think about the contrast here. On one hand, you've got your standard four-year presidencies. Every few years, presidents rotate in and out, political parties rise and fall, and the news cycle just moves on. It's pretty fleeting. But on the other hand, you have generational dynasties. We're talking about enduring legacies, deeply entrenched influence, and businesses worth hundreds of billions of dollars. So the crucial point is that while elected officials hold temporary terms, these massive dynastic families represent a permanent structural power that easily outlasts any single administration.
Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, beyond the podium. Then, the Rockefellers and industrial might. The Kennedys and political ambition. The Waltons and retail dominance. And finally, the price of power. Part 1. Beyond the podium. Uncovering the illusion of American power. Part 2. Rockefellers. Industrial might. The architects of American industry.
This whole thing really kicked off in the late 1800s with John D. Rockefeller. He took this relatively small Ohio business and turned it into the absolute behemoth that was Standard Oil. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale. We're talking 90%. At its absolute peak, Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of all oil refining in the entire nation, leaving a measly 10% for the rest of the market. This wasn't just a successful company, this was the sheer monopolistic scale of controlling a vital national resource, completely dominating the lifeblood of a rapidly growing country.
And that reach, it was absolutely inescapable on the ground. Their oil wasn't just sitting in barrels somewhere. It was physically powering the rising factories, fueling the expanding railroads, supplying massive ships, and eventually driving those very early automobiles. By holding absolute control over this vital fuel, the Rockefellers essentially single-handedly powered the American Industrial Revolution. I mean, they literally laid the tracks and provided the fuel for modern America. And this unprecedented dominance built an individual fortune that would be worth hundreds of billions of dollars in today's money. Mind-blowing, right? But, as you might expect, great wealth often brings intense scrutiny. And here, we see a really fascinating duality in the Rockefeller legacy. On one hand, you have their incredible philanthropy. They donated billions to education, medicine, science, and public health, benefiting major institutions like the University of Chicago and establishing the massive Rockefeller Foundation, which completely revolutionized modern medical research. But on the flip side, we see this fierce government pushback. Ultimately, the federal government had to step in and aggressively break up Standard Oil under U.S. antitrust laws just to shatter that monopoly and restore basic market competition. But here is what you should really take away from this. The legacy absolutely lives on. Even after the government legally broke up Standard Oil, the family's influence didn't just disappear into the history books. Their immense wealth had already permanently permeated American institutions. It continued seamlessly through banking, massive investments, real estate, and ongoing global public health initiatives. Honestly, over a century later, Rockefeller remains one of the most recognized and heavily weighted names in global history.
So from industrial monopolies to the halls of Washington, that perfectly wraps up the era of oil dominance. Now, we're going to completely shift gears and look at an entirely different avenue to national prominence.
Part 3. Kennedy's Political Ambition, Inspiring Millions and Enduring Tragedy. The rise of this particular dynasty started with businessman Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Let's move through this and see how this builds, because they cemented their legacy across a remarkably rapid, dense timeline. In 1961, John F. Kennedy makes history by becoming the 35th President of the United States, bringing a totally new era of youthful energy to Washington. But then, just 2 years later, in 1963, the entire nation stops. JFK is tragically assassinated in Dallas, Texas. The family's momentum and public service, though, it refuses to halt. Post-1963, his brother Robert F. Kennedy serves as Attorney General and mounts his own deeply impactful run for president, while Ted Kennedy goes on to become one of the longest-serving and most influential senators in United States history.
This family's story is entirely unique in American history, largely because of a profound duality. On one side, you have enduring hope. JFK was young, he was charismatic, and his presidency genuinely inspired millions across the globe with ideas of space exploration and civil progress. But casting a massive shadow over that is profound tragedy. Those shocking assassinations transformed the family into an enduring symbol of national mourning. Through all that triumph and devastating loss, their name became forever woven into the very fabric of American politics and public service.
Let's take a quick breath here. Offer low prices every day. It's such a remarkably simple idea, but it completely changed the world. This thought brings us to our third and final case study, pivoting entirely away from political power and industrial resource control to an avenue of power based strictly on everyday consumerism.
Part 4. Walton's Retail Dominance, building the largest retailer on Earth.
Unlike political dynasties, the Walton family built its incredible influence through retail, starting with one visionary man, Sam Walton, 1962. It is honestly staggering to realize just how recently this particular dynasty began, especially when you compare it to the Rockefellers back in the late 1800s. In 1962, Sam Walton opened the very first Walmart, fundamentally believing that he could bring lower prices and much better logistics to rural America. And man, that simple concept evolved with absolutely unprecedented speed. From just one small discount store in Arkansas, it grew into a global empire that today employs millions of people worldwide. Walmart completely rewired global supply chains and totally altered our consumer habits, serving millions of customers every single week. Because of this absolutely staggering scale, the Waltons have become one of the wealthiest families in the world today. It really just proves that everyday consumer choices can aggregate into colossal power.
But just like the Rockefellers, this massive scale comes with some really complex national consequences. On one hand, their immense community support is completely undeniable. Through vast investments in their family foundation, the Walton family heavily supports education, environmental initiatives, and broad community development across the country. Yet, weighing right against that are fierce national debates. The company is continually at the center of intense scrutiny over wages, labor practices, and what their dominance means for small businesses and the broader future of retail. The power they wield touches almost every town in America, bringing with it immense responsibility and, naturally, constant public debate.
Part 5. The Price of Power. The Duality of Dynastic Legacies.
As we wrap up this explainer, it becomes super clear that all three of these families share a really complex duality in exactly how they shaped America. We've explored three highly distinct paths to enduring influence here. Number one, resource control with the Rockefellers, monopolizing the oil that physically built our modern industries. Number two, public service and politics with the Kennedys, capturing the hearts, minds, and legislative direction of a nation. And number three, consumerism and sheer scale with the Waltons, leveraging everyday retail transactions into a massive, unprecedented empire.
The reality is simply this. Whether you personally praise their extensive philanthropy and lifelong public service, or deeply criticize their labor practices and monopolistic tendencies, their impact on the American economy and culture is a factual reality. It is simply impossible to ignore the deep structural footprint they have left on the United States across multiple generations.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. Just think about your daily routine for a second. The fuel you use to commute, the policies governing your community, the massive stores where you shop for groceries. How much of their legacy shapes your life today? It's a pretty profound question to ponder. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I absolutely can't wait to dive into the next installment of the source material with you. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.